I'm Emma Chen, and when my parents forgot to invite me to our family Christmas for the third year running, I thought that was rock bottom. Then my dad needed emergency heart surgery and asked me for $50,000. What I told them changed everything. But before I reveal how a single text message exposed 28 years of lies and favoritism, let me tell you how this all started before we jump back in. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The notification ping on my phone came at 11:47 p.m. On December 23rd, I was sitting in my small apartment above Murphy's art supply store, wrapping the last of my Christmas gifts by the glow of my laptop screen, when Jessica's Instagram story popped up. There she was, my younger sister, raising a champagne flute in our childhood living room. The one with the massive stone fireplace that Dad built himself. The room was decorated exactly like Mom always did it, with the 12-foot Douglas fir in the corner. Draped in the same gold and burgundy ornaments we'd used since I was 5 years old. But it wasn't the familiar decorations that made my stomach drop like a stone through ice water. It was the time stamp. Yes, it was happening right now. The annual Chen family Christmas Eve celebration, the tradition that had defined our family for over 2 decades. It's happening without me. Again, I scrolled through Jessica's posts with shaking hands. There was Cousin Michael from Portland with his new girlfriend. There was Uncle Tony doing his famous Santa impression for the kids. There was Aunt Pat laughing at something Dad was saying while carving the prime rib. There were at least 30 people crowded into our family home, the same home where I'd grown up, where I'd helped Mom hang those same ornaments every year until I moved out. The worst part wasn't that I wasn't there. The worst part was that no one seemed to notice I was missing. No concerned texts asking where I was. No phone calls wondering if I was stuck in traffic. Just radio silence, as if Emma Chen had simply ceased to exist the moment the guest list was made. I called Jessica first, my hands trembling as I held the phone. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, bright and cheerful, asked me to leave a message. In the background, I could hear the familiar sounds of our family gathering, Dad's booming laugh, Mom's voice directing someone toward the kitchen. The clinking of glasses and the warmth of conversation that had once included me. Next, I tried Mom, straight to voicemail, then Dad. Same thing. Either they had their phones silenced for the party, or they were actively avoiding my calls. Given the pattern of the last few years, I suspected the latter. I sat there in my apartment, surrounded by the gifts I'd carefully chosen for each family member, and tried to remember when exactly I'd become invisible to them. It hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual erosion, like water wearing away stone. First, it was small things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Plans made around my schedule rather than including me in the planning. The shift had become more obvious after I graduated from Pacific Northwest Art Institute 3 years ago. While Jessica was climbing the corporate ladder at TechFlow Solutions, earning what Mom proudly announced was nearly 6 figures, I was building a freelance graphic design business from scratch. While Jessica bought her sleek downtown condo with its floor-to-ceiling windows and smart home technology, I was renting this tiny space above an art store, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and the sound of buses rumbling past on Oak Street. To my parents, Jessica represented success. She had the business degree from Oregon State, the impressive job title, the monthly salary that arrived like clockwork. She drove a leased BMW and wore designer clothes to client meetings. She was everything they'd hoped for in a daughter. I, on the other hand, represented uncertainty. My income fluctuated based on projects. Sometimes I had months where I barely scraped together rent, and other months where a big branding contract would leave me comfortable for a while. I worked in an industry they didn't understand, creating logos and websites for small businesses, designing promotional materials for local nonprofits. To them, it wasn't a real career. It was an expensive hobby that had somehow extended past college. The irony was that I'd been more successful lately than they realized. My design for Riverside Community Bank's rebrand had won a regional award. 3 of my clients had been featured in Oregon Business Magazine. Last month, I'd signed a retainer with a Portland tech startup that would provide steady income for the next year. But none of that mattered to them because it didn't fit their definition of achievement. As I sat there staring at Jessica's Instagram stories, watching my family celebrate without me, I realized this wasn't about tonight. This was about every time they'd chosen her accomplishments over mine. Every time they'd asked about Jessica's promotion while barely acknowledging my latest project. Every time they'd introduced her as our successful daughter while referring to me as our artistic one. As if creativity and success were mutually exclusive. The Christmas Eve exclusion was just the latest chapter in a story that had been writing itself for years. I decided to drive over there, not to crash the party, but just to see for myself. Maybe there was some explanation I was missing. Maybe there had been a miscommunication. Maybe my invitation had gotten lost in the mail, though deep down I knew. That was wishful thinking in an age of group texts and Facebook events. The 20-minute drive to Maple Ridge felt like the longest journey of my life. Every red light gave me another opportunity to turn around, to go home, to pretend I'd never seen those Instagram posts. But something kept me moving forward, some desperate need for confirmation that this was really happening. When I turned onto Elmwood Drive, I could see the glow from our house 3 blocks away. Dad had always gone overboard with the Christmas lights, turning our 2-story colonial into a beacon visible from the main highway. This year was no different. The roofline blazed with warm white LEDs. The oak trees in the front yard were wrapped in twinkling strands, and every window glowed with that golden light that promised warmth and belonging. I parked across the street, hidden behind the Thompsons' massive SUV, and just watched. Through the large bay window, I could see the party in full swing. Mom was in her element, wearing the red velvet dress she brought out every Christmas Eve, directing traffic between the kitchen and the dining room with the efficiency of a seasoned event planner. Dad was holding court near the fireplace, probably telling the story about the Christmas when our cat knocked over the tree and destroyed half the presents. Jessica was everywhere, moving through the crowd like she owned the place. She looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, even this late in the evening. She was the star of the show, as always, accepting congratulations on her latest promotion, showing off photos of her recent vacation to Cabo, basking in the attention that came so naturally to her. What struck me most was how complete the scene looked without me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This wasn't a gathering with a noticeable absence. This was a family celebration that had simply evolved beyond including me. They weren't maliciously excluding me. They had just forgotten I existed. Sitting in my car, watching my family through glass, I started remembering all the signs I'd chosen to ignore. Last Thanksgiving, when I'd shown up with homemade pumpkin bread and found out Jessica had already brought dessert. Same dessert, but from an expensive bakery downtown. Mom had gushed over Jessica's thoughtfulness while relegating my contribution to the kitchen counter where it remained untouched. When I'd offered to help with dishes, Mom had waved me away, saying Jessica was already taking care of everything. Then there was my birthday in September. Jessica had thrown herself an elaborate 30th birthday party at the Riverside Country Club, complete with a live jazz band and a cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The whole family had been there, dressed to the nines, toasting Jessica's success and bright future. My 28th birthday, just 2 months later, had been acknowledged with a card from Mom that arrived 3 days late and a text from Dad asking if I wanted to grab lunch sometime soon. The pattern extended beyond just celebrations. When Jessica had needed help moving into her condo, Dad had rented a truck and recruited Uncle Tony and Cousin Michael for a full family moving day. When I'd moved to my current apartment, I'd hired 2 college students and handled it myself. Jessica's car had broken down last spring. Dad had immediately loaned her his pristine truck and personally overseen the repairs at the shop. When my ancient Honda had started making concerning noises, Dad had told me to take it to the mechanic down the street and work out a payment plan. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I could feel their love, distant and conditional as it might be. It was that they didn't prioritize me. I wasn't their emergency contact, their first thought, their go-to daughter. I was their backup plan, their secondary option, their afterthought. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't the black sheep of the family. I was something worse. I was the forgotten sheep, the one who'd wandered so far from the flock that the shepherds had stopped counting me among their own. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my oldest friend who'd moved to Seattle for work but still checked in regularly. "How's the Chen Christmas chaos? Did your dad tell the cat story again?" Stared at the message, realizing that Marcus, who lived 3 hours away and saw my family maybe twice a year, had remembered our tradition better than my own parents had remembered to include me in it. I typed back, watching from the parking lot. Didn't get invited again. My phone immediately rang. Marcus didn't even bother with hello. "Emma, what do you mean you're in the parking lot? Why aren't you inside? 'Cause nobody told me it." "What's happening?" I said, my voice cracking, despite my efforts to stay composed. "I found out on Instagram." Silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice tight with anger. "This is the third year, Emma. This isn't an accident anymore." He was right, and hearing him say it out loud made it impossible to deny. The first year, 2 Christmases ago, I'd assumed it was an oversight. Plans had been made quickly, and somehow I'd fallen through the cracks. I'd shown up anyway, bringing wine and apologies for being late, and been welcomed with a kind of awkward surprise that confirmed I hadn't been expected. Last year, I'd asked Mom directly about Christmas plans in early December. She'd been vague, mentioning that they might do something small, that Jessica was so busy with work, that maybe we'd just have a quiet holiday. Then I'd seen the photos. Afterward, a gathering nearly identical to tonight's, and realized quiet holiday had meant without Emma this year. They hadn't even bothered with excuses. "You need to go home," Marcus said gently. "This isn't healthy. You're torturing yourself," but I couldn't move. I sat there watching my family celebrate, trying to memorize the scene, knowing that something fundamental had shifted tonight. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about understanding my place in the family hierarchy, about accepting that I'd been demoted to extended family status without ever being officially notified. A text notification lit up my phone. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking maybe Mom had noticed my absence. Maybe someone was wondering where I was. But it was just a promotional message from a restaurant downtown, wishing me happy holidays and offering a discount on New Year's Eve reservations. Even strangers were thinking of me more than my own family was. I finally drove away from Elmwood Drive around 1 in the morning. When the last of the party guests started trickling out to their cars carrying leftover containers that Mom had, no doubt packed with her usual abundance. The drive back to downtown Riverside felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. From the manicured lawns and perfect driveways of Maple Ridge to the narrow streets and converted buildings of the Arts District where I'd made my home, the contrast had never been more stark than it was that night. Maple Ridge represented everything my parents valued: stability, prosperity, appearances that mattered to the community. Every house was a testament to financial success, with their 3-car garages and professionally landscaped gardens. The neighborhood was where successful families lived, where children grew up to become doctors and lawyers and business executives like Jessica. My apartment above Murphy's Art Supply existed in a completely different ecosystem. The building was a converted warehouse from the 1920s, with exposed brick walls and industrial windows that rattled when trucks passed by. The neighborhood was full of young professionals who couldn't afford the suburbs, artists who chose authenticity over status, and small business owners who prioritized passion over profit. During the day, the area buzzed with creativity and entrepreneurship. Coffee shops hosted poetry readings, galleries showcased local painters, and restaurants served food that prioritized flavor over presentation. But at night, especially on holidays when everyone had somewhere else to be, the district felt hollow and forgotten, much like I felt myself. I climbed the narrow staircase to my apartment, past Murphy's darkened storefront with its displays of canvases and easels, past the landing where Mrs. Garcia from the apartment next door always left plants that somehow thrived despite the limited natural light. My keys jingled in the lock, and I stepped into the space that had been my sanctuary for the past 2 years. The apartment was small, but it was mine. High ceilings gave the illusion of space, and I'd arranged my furniture to maximize both comfort and functionality. My design workstation dominated one wall, with dual monitors displaying the latest project I'd been perfecting for a local nonprofit. Sketches and color samples covered a large bulletin board, representing weeks of careful planning and revision. My small dining table doubled as a conference space for client meetings, though most of my business happened over video calls these days. What the space lacked in square footage, it made up for in personality. My walls displayed a carefully curated collection of artwork. Some pieces from local artists I'd met at gallery openings, others my own experimental work from art school. The mix created an environment that felt both professional and deeply personal, reflecting the dual nature of my life as both creative, professional, and perpetual outsider to my own family. I made tea and settled into my reading chair, the one piece of furniture I'd splurged on when I first moved out. It was positioned perfectly by the large industrial window that looked out over Oak Street, giving me a view of the city that never quite slept. Even at this hour, there were signs of life, the occasional late-night delivery truck, the soft glow from the 24-hour laundromat across the street, the distant sound of music from whatever bar was still open downtown.
Ow.
This was my world, and most of the time, I loved it. I'd built something here that was entirely my own, independent of family expectations or societal definitions of success. My clients respected my work, my neighbors knew me by name. I'd found a community of creative professionals who understood the irregular rhythms of freelance life. But tonight, sitting alone with the taste of exclusion still bitter in my mouth, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been exiled rather than having chosen independence. The distance between my life and my family's hadn't been entirely voluntary. It had grown gradually, fed by years of subtle messages that my choices were less valuable, my achievements less meaningful, my presence less essential. The family business had always been central to the Chen identity. Dad had started Chen's auto repair and body shop the year before I was born, building it from a small garage into one of Riverside's most trusted automotive businesses. The shop was located on the edge of downtown, occupying a full city block with multiple service bays, a customer waiting area that Mom had decorated with photos of classic cars, in an office where Dad conducted business with the straightforward honesty that had earned him a loyal customer base. Growing up, the shop had been our family's second home. Jessica and I had spent countless after-school hours there doing homework. In the office while Dad worked on engines and Mom handled the books, the smell of motor oil and the sound of pneumatic tools had been the soundtrack of our childhood. Dad had always talked about the business as something that could support the whole family, a legacy that could be passed down to the next generation. Jessica had shown interest early, asking questions about profit margins and customer retention, accompanying Dad to business networking events when she got older. Even though she'd chosen corporate marketing over automotive repair, she understood the language of business in ways that made sense to our parents. When she talked about quarterly targets and client acquisition, Dad nodded along with the recognition of someone seeing his own values reflected back at him. My relationship with the family business had always been more complicated. I'd inherited Dad's attention to detail and problem-solving skills, but I applied them to design challenges rather than mechanical ones. I could spend hours perfecting the typography on a logo or adjusting the color balance on a website. It's driven by the same pursuit of excellence that made Dad one of the region's most respected auto body specialists. But when I tried to explain the intricacies of brand identity or user experience design, I could see their eyes glaze over with polite incomprehension. The irony was that my design skills could have benefited the family business significantly. Their website looked like it had been built in 2003. Their marketing materials were outdated, and their social media presence was practically non-existent. I'd offered to help with rebranding multiple times over the years, suggesting ways to modernize their image while preserving the trustworthy reputation Dad had worked so hard to build. But my offers were always politely declined or indefinitely postponed, as if accepting my professional expertise would somehow diminish the legitimacy of their operation. Instead, when they decided to update their marketing materials last spring, they'd hired a firm from Portland, paying significantly more than I would have charged for work that, frankly, it wasn't as good as what I could have produced. Jessica had been involved in the selection process, using her corporate connections to identify potential agencies. The final choice had been presented as a family decision, though I'd only learned about it after the contracts were signed. That had stung more than I'd admitted at the time. It wasn't just about the lost income, though I certainly could have used the business. It was about being overlooked for an opportunity that perfectly matched my skills by the people who should have known me best. It was about watching them invest in outside expertise while treating my professional capabilities as a hobby rather than a legitimate service. Sitting in my apartment that Christmas morning, surrounded by the evidence of my actual success, I realized that my family's inability to see my value had become the defining dynamic of our relationship. They weren't intentionally cruel, but their blindness to my achievements had created a distance that felt increasingly impossible to bridge. The tea had grown cold in my hands, and the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky outside my window. Christmas Day was beginning, and for the first time in my life, I would be spending it entirely alone. Christmas Day arrived with the kind of crisp December morning that Oregon does so well, all blue skies and frost-covered windows. I woke up late, having spent most of the night staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment from outside my family home. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt different from the usual peaceful silence I enjoyed. This was the heavy quiet of isolation, of being the only person in a city full of families gathered around breakfast tables and gift exchanges. My phone showed dozens of Christmas messages from friends, colleagues, and even a few clients wishing me well. But nothing from Elmwood Drive, not a single text from anyone with the last name Chen. I made coffee and settled at my dining table with my laptop, thinking I might lose myself in work, but instead found myself scrolling through social media. Jessica's Instagram was a carefully curated documentation of Chen family Christmas morning. There was Mom in her silk pajamas and robe, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Dad sat in his favorite recliner, surrounded by wrapping paper, grinning at some gift Jessica had given him. Extended family members I barely saw, except at major holidays, filled the living room. Everyone looking relaxed and content in the warm glow of the Christmas tree. What struck me wasn't just that I was absent from these photos, but how natural that absence appeared. No awkward gaps in group shots where someone might have stood, no obvious empty spaces on the couch. The composition was perfect without me, as if the family photo had always been meant to include exactly these people and no others. I closed the app and called Marcus, needing to hear a friendly voice that wasn't trying to sell me anything or wish me generic holiday greetings. "Please tell me you're not still stalking your family on social media," he said, instead of hello. "Good morning to you too," I replied, though I couldn't deny the accuracy of his accusation. "Emma, seriously, you need to stop torturing yourself. Come up to Seattle. Catch the next bus. My roommates are doing this whole group orphan Christmas thing for people who can't make it home. It's actually pretty great." The offer was tempting, but something kept me rooted in place. I can't just run away from this, Marcus. It's my life, my family, my city. I shouldn't have to flee to Seattle because they've decided I don't matter. But what's the alternative? Sitting alone in your apartment feeling sorry for yourself? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed Mom, and my heart immediately started racing. Finally, someone had noticed my absence. Finally, there would be an explanation, an apology, an invitation to come over for leftover turkey and strained but familiar conversation. "Hold on, Marcus, my mom's calling." I switched lines with trembling fingers. "Hi, Mom. Emma, honey. Merry Christmas." Her voice had that bright, slightly forced quality she used when she was trying to smooth over something uncomfortable. "I hope you're having a lovely day." "It's been quiet," I said carefully, waiting for her to acknowledge what we both knew. "That's nice, dear. Listen, I'm calling because we had such a wonderful time last night. I realized we didn't get a chance to talk about New Year's. Jessica is hosting a little gathering at her place, just family, and I wanted to make sure you knew about it." The casual mention of last night's party, delivered as if I'd been there, hit me like a slap. She was inviting me to Jessica's New Year's party while completely ignoring the fact that I'd been excluded from Christmas Eve. The cognitive dissonance was breathtaking. I saw the photos on Instagram, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Looked like quite a celebration. There was a pause just long enough for me to hope she might acknowledge what had happened, might offer some explanation or apology. Instead, she bulldozed forward. Oh, you know how Jessica is with her phone, always taking pictures. Anyway, New Year's Eve, 7 o'clock, cocktail attire. Can we count you in? Yeah, Mom. I said slowly. I wasn't invited to Christmas Eve. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to that tone she used when she wanted to end uncomfortable conversations quickly. Oh, honey, that was just a small thing. Very last minute. Jessica was so stressed with work, and we didn't want to burden anyone with extra planning. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its craftsmanship. A small thing. Last minute. As if the annual Chen family Christmas Eve celebration was planned weeks in advance, with guest lists and catered appetizers and coordinated gift exchanges had somehow materialized spontaneously, without time to include me. Mom, there were 30 people there. Were there? I didn't count. You know how these things are. They just grow organically. Her ability to rewrite reality in real time was genuinely impressive. I could picture her standing in the kitchen, that still smelled like yesterday's feast, looking at the evidence of extensive planning and preparation, and somehow convincing herself that it had all been spontaneous. So, about New Year's, she continued, as if the previous exchange hadn't happened. Should I tell Jessica to expect you? I realized in that moment that I was watching a masterclass in gaslighting. She wasn't going to acknowledge the exclusion. She wasn't going to apologize or explain. She was going to pretend it hadn't happened and move forward as if I was the unreasonable one for bringing it up. I'll think about it, I said. Wonderful. I'll tell Jessica, probably yes. Oh, and Emma, maybe wear something a little more festive than usual. Jessica's friends from work will be there. Very successful people. And you know how important. First impressions are, the criticism stung because it was so perfectly targeted. My wardrobe consisted mainly of pieces that worked for client meetings and creative industry events, clothes that prioritized style and comfort over expensive labels. Compared to Jessica's designer collection, my outfits probably did look insufficient. For her social circle, I have to go, Mom. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, dear. Love you. She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Marcus was still on the other line, and I switched back to him with shaking hands. What happened? You sound like you've seen a ghost. I told him about the conversation, about Mom's casual dismissal of my exclusion, and her immediate pivot to the next family gathering where my presence would be marginally tolerated. As I spoke, I could hear my own voice getting higher, more strained, as the full impact of what had just happened settled in. She's gaslighting you, Marcus said bluntly when I finished. She's making you question your own perception of reality. This is psychological manipulation, Emma. He was right, but hearing it stated so directly was jarring. I'd grown up with this dynamic, had learned to accept these subtle corrections of my reality as normal family interaction. Mom had always been the family diplomat, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained harmony by gently adjusting everyone's memories until they aligned with her preferred version of events. But this felt different. This wasn't just smoothing. Over a minor disagreement, or putting a positive spin on an awkward situation, this was actively denying something that had clearly, definitively happened, while simultaneously criticizing me for not being grateful enough for future invitations. The worst part, I told Marcus, is that she's probably going to tell Dad and Jessica that she called me, that she was thoughtful enough to include me in New Year's plans, and that I was difficult about it. By tonight, I'll be the ungrateful daughter who made Christmas about myself instead of being happy for the family. You can't keep enabling this, Emma. You have to stop participating in their version of reality. But even as he said it, I knew how hard that would be. This family system had been in place for 28 years. Everyone knew their roles. Everyone understood the unspoken rules. Mom maintained harmony through selective memory. Dad supported whatever Mom decided. Jessica basked in the attention that came from being the successful daughter. And I accepted. Whatever scraps of inclusion were offered while pretending not to notice how little I mattered. Changing that dynamic would require more than just recognizing it. It would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed, and consequences I wasn't sure I was ready to face. 3 months later, everything changed with a single phone call. Dad had suffered a massive heart attack while working late at the shop. Mom's voice was shaking when she called, suddenly remembering my phone number existed. The surgery would cost $80,000 after insurance. Money they didn't have after years of maintaining their expensive lifestyle. "Emma, honey, I know this is a lot to ask," Mom said, her diplomatic tone cracking under genuine desperation. "But we heard about Grandma Rose's inheritance. Could you possibly help us? We're family." I sat in my apartment, looking at the bank statements showing the trust fund I'd never mentioned to them. The one that had grown substantially alongside my thriving design business. They had no idea I'd been quietly successful. No idea that my hobby had evolved into a 6-figure income. No idea that Grandma Rose had left me enough money to help them 10 times over. "You want me to give you money?" I said slowly, "to save the father who forgot I existed until he needed something?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unacknowledged truth. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. Sometimes, the most powerful word in any language is no. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.